If you ever get quite stuck at designing and planning your sewing projects, you don't know where to start, well, in this video, I'm going to take you step by step on my thought process, step by step, the whole way through of designing and planning my latest sewing project, a refashion, and hopefully will give you some more insight so that you can bring this to your own sewing projects. Welcome back, my sewing friends. It is always so lovely to see your smiling faces here. Welcome. If you are just new here, very much welcome. My name is Evelyn Wood and I'm the creator of Vintage Sewing School. And here we talk about everything sewing skills to help improve your garment sewing. That's what we specialize. So if that is what you're interested in doing, do hit the subscribe button down below so I know that you want to see more of these videos. And what we are talking about today is the design and the planning process of sewing projects, in particular a refashion. But it does apply for both sewing from a pattern and refashion. It's the process behind of it, because I know it's very often very quickly gone through and often just not talked about in particularly, videos here on YouTube. And so, you know me, I like to show you my processes, my thought processes behind everything. So it really gives you a better look into what choices I'm making and why. So it really gives you much more knowledge to go to your own projects and make better decisions on how you can create the things that you want. So I must admit, this project I'm going to work through step by step in my whole design process, because you'll find out I have actually already completed and finished this refashion. So I'm coming with the view that I have finished it, but I'm going to go back to the start and talk about my original ideas, because as you know, refashions always develop along the way. And you'll see that because the actual video of the make is next week. So you'll get to see that. This is a teaser, I suppose. That will be next week, and you can see how the design evolved from my original planning. But we're going to stick with what I originally planned and the processes I made that you'll see in that video. You don't even know, you won't see this, because this is the sort of stuff that is really, it takes a long time. It's just not, well, it kind of always gets skipped in videos because there's only so much you can put into a YouTube video. Okay, let's get into it. So first of all, I recommend everyone should start a little sewing journal, and where you can keep all of your sewing plans and everything. So my Vintage Sewing School members will recognize this. This is a collection planner that I have available for all my students there. This is for wardrobe planning. So we have a lot on how to actually plan all of your makes as a collection. And then I have these design and plan sheets that I fill out for every make, refashion, all of it, for any sewing project. It's about planning and order, planning your design, getting all your materials in order, knowing what skills you need, and being able to plot out a plan of attack. So it just makes it really easy when you're coming to make it, right? You've already got all this made. So what we'll be focusing on is the design and the plan. And of course, the design is first. Now, of course, first we start with a inspiration. Now, you can make up your own sheets, of course, and just do this on paper. I like to do it on paper, but the inspiration is often good on a Pinterest board or something like this is really handy. So I was really inspired by peplum tops. So I was starting with I should go back and start. The whole refashion here is, in my plan, is from a men's shirt refashion, and it is a use it all refashion. So refashion it all. It is a collaboration video, and you'll see next week that it's a men's shirt and we have to use all of the shirt. All of it. It's a zero waste refashion. So there is a big challenge there. Now, one of the other rules, and this is more for next week, but one of the other rules is we can use 20% extra materials on this. So these were some of the guidelines that I was restricted and designing into. And so my inspiration really evolved around, I knew that I wanted a 3/4 sleeve and I knew I wanted a peplum. And so I had looked through many different ideas and went from there. But because it's a refashion, of course, you have to use what you've got. So it always evolves with only what you've got. So I stopped my inspiration there, because inspiration will come later when I'm using all of these little bits of fabric. So doing sketches can be hard. I have created my own templates over time of different things. This one is one I did for a workshop a little while ago for men's shirt refashion specifically. So this template suits me perfect for this one. I like to put them underneath and just trace out on top. I like to have templates to sketch off. It helps me create smooth lines. But go ahead and you can use the pattern envelope, the design pattern envelope, and sketch that out. There's a little sneaky tip for you. So what we have here is I knew that I wanted to cut off the collar and probably use a bias facing as a finish. So I started there. Then I also knew I wanted to make this 3/4 sleeve and puffy somehow. I also knew that I would reuse the cuffs, the original cuffs somehow on the sleeves. And so, you know, I just sort of drew in puff sleeves, and I'll figure that out as we go along. And a little peplum, and I knew I would repurpose the collar as a little extra peplum somehow. Again, I will work out the details as I go along, because with the refashion, you're using what you've got, so there's no way to design end to end beforehand. I have a broad idea, and this is what I would work it out as I go along with the refashion. And so once my sketch was completed of the idea I want, you'll see that this actually changed quite a lot in the end, because a refashion is design along the way. And so some fabric and trims that I knew I was going to use. It's always good to list these out. And this is particularly for a project, sewing from a pattern. You know the pattern that you're going to use, the different trims that you need to get. List them all out, because then you can actually have all of your materials and supplies ready on hand, and you don't have to stop later on. So I knew I needed my men's shirt, so I needed to pick one that would work for this design. And then I knew I was going to use a bias binding for the neckline, so I had to obviously get that. But as this is a use it all refashion, that was all the fabric and trims that I could use. So this stage is all about your inspiration, your design, and listing out all the fabrics and trims that you're going to need. That is kind of the design. And then we move on to the plan. And usually I get to do all of this in my head these days. I don't need to write it out, but it is really nice to actually write it out. And believe me, this is how I used to have to do it every single time. Otherwise it would get all muddled, and it is quite hard to actually remember this in your mind unless you've done it at least 1,000 times. So it is best to write it all out. And one of these in particular on here, I cannot stress enough, is absolutely needed. So these sheets I also think double as a reference and record later, to keep references and records of all of your projects. So you can come back and reference and see the pattern and the design and what you might have changed and what you made it from, and all of your notes. These are what you will keep later on too. So they serve a double purpose, not just right now, but for future as well. So let's move on to the plan. I always like to have a little description of what I'm making here. 3/4 sleeve, peplum top, and I just wrote out the little rules here because it's a men's shirt for my refashion. So if you're making from scratch, of course, you just do a little description, just like it does on your pattern envelope. Just a line skirt with da da da. It just helps you in your mind. Sometimes maybe your sketch isn't quite so, realistic, and gives you the shapes, so it helps you to write out what the shapes are. Okay, let's work around here. So I always like to write out skills. So particularly as you're learning, each project you're doing might include a new skill that you need to learn, or something you might just want to practice on before you do it for the real thing. So list those out. Maybe, for example, it is a bias facing, maybe it's top stitching, maybe it's hand sewing, maybe it's refashioning in general. These are just specific to here. So maybe it's a zip, maybe it's the fit of the garment that you really want to work on. Maybe it is buttons and buttonholes. List out some things that you either need to practice, or skills you need, or something that you need to bring to your attention and do maybe beforehand. So you've got them listed here, and you know what you're going to practice on first before you get to the real thing. Remember, we've talked about this before. We've talked many videos on practicing and testing things before. It's just one of those things that always gets glossed over and forgotten about. Trust me, it is always here. It's just not something that you see all the time. And then I always think it's good to list out the things you have and the things you need. So go through your stash and find out what can you use from your stash, because that's the best way to use all of your things. Do you have the fabric, the buttons, etc.? Write out the things that you have for your project, and then list out the things you need to buy. So this is really useful when you plan ahead, so you can keep an eye out for those things that you need to get you know, as you go to the shops over the next few weeks or months, you can just slowly collect the things that you need. And again, we've made videos on sewing budgets and sticking with sewing budgets. And one of them is just to collect like this, to set yourself a monthly budget. And so planning ahead is absolutely necessary to do that. And now here is the real juicy part. This is the absolute key to it all, is your plan of action. I cannot stress how important this is enough. So in fashion college, this is where I realized that this is a thing and you should write it out no matter what you are. If you don't do anything else, just do this. Even if you're sewing from a pattern and you're following the pattern instructions, write out your own plan of action and just write it out top level. It doesn't have to be nitty gritty. I mean, it can be if you want, but at least top level so you know which order you're doing all the things in. For example, mine here, I knew I started with how I'm going to have to construct my refashion. Deconstruction is first, so I knew I was going to have to cut the sleeves, cut the neckline, and cut the peplum. And cut all those to shape, because when you're refashioning, it depends on what you have left, the fabric you have left to work with. So, and then that's where the design evolves. So I started with knowing which ones I knew were certain, which elements. So think the neckline, the cuffs, or the peplum. They're kind of the three elements that I have going on in this refashion, because I wanted to keep the sleeves as they are. Basically just so I didn't have to use the scrap fabric. You'll see in the video next week. And so I knew that the neckline was going to be first because that was going to be as is. Whatever I had left over from the collar, I was planning to repurpose for the peplum somehow. So I obviously can't do the peplum first before I have cut off and done the collar. Now your neckline is on a bias cut. So when you cut this, it's on bias and it's very prone to stretching and fraying. So I wanted to finish this off first. So it's going to be handled the least and it will be finished and not stretch out. So I wanted to finish the neckline first. And then I thought I would move on to the cuffs and sleeves, because again, it will depend what I have left over after this that will keep, you know, that I'll use that for future bits. So I was going to work on this next. And as this is a refashion, I would work out somehow to add the cuffs onto the sleeves. You'll see how I did it in the future video. And then I knew the next plan of action was to do the peplum last. Well, not last, but after this. And so that's when I would work out and use whatever I had left, the collar, anything from the cuffs, the bits and pieces, and I would work out that the last construction-wise, that would be the last thing I do, because then after that would come the decoration. So the decoration is how I planned on using all of the last scraps to create a zero waste refashion. I had something clever planned and I won't give it away yet. I'll wait until you can be revealed in the next week's video, the make of this refashion. But the decoration was going to be last because that's how I would be using up every little last bit, and that's always the finishes, of course. So I think you can really see that by planning this out, it makes it so much easier to go into this refashion, this make, and do everything in order that makes sense for the garment construction. Again, we have talked about videos on garment construction and how to learn this because it is so important. If you really like this sort of thought process, the why behind everything and my style of teaching, I do invite you to come join me at Vintage Sewing School, because this is what we do there. You get all these kind of fancy little tools and things to help you do all this process. So there are links down below to come join me, and of course to all of the extra videos here on YouTube that I've already pointed out that I think you'll really enjoy as well. But you will see, so stay tuned for next week's video, because this was just my initial plan. This is all the thought process and everything that I went through in my mind to at the start of the refashion in the make. And you'll see this makes up about this much of the video next week. But this is what is done, the behind the scenes, if you will, that really goes into making a project turn out well and easy, because you have everything planned out, and it really does help when you start implementing these types of things in your own sewing projects. So tell me, I would love to hear, do you already do lists or plans of actions and design sketches? Let me know. I would love to hear. And if you have any tips for any of our fellow sewists here, leave them down below as well, because sharing all of our sewing information and knowledge is how we all get better. So I look forward to reading all your comments down below as well. Stay tuned for next week, my friends. And until then, happy sewing. Bye.